The Shattered Illusion. London basked in a golden sunrise, its historic streets alive with the anticipation of a new day. The stone walls of Buckingham Palace reflected the early morning light, creating an aura of timeless majesty. Tourists swarmed the gates, their laughter mingling with the sound of camera shutters. Among them stood a small family, a mother and her young son, occupying a quiet corner near the wrought iron railings. The mother, Amara, was a striking figure of grace. She wore a plain but elegant dress, her dark skin glowing under the sunlight. Her son, Noah, sat in a wheelchair, his legs too frail to carry his weight, but his spirit eager and inquisitive. Noah's wide eyes darted toward the royal guards, mesmerized by their statuesque discipline. "Mom," he whispered, his voice tinged with awe. "They look like statues. How do they not move?" Amara smiled, crouching to adjust the scarf around his neck. "That's their job, sweetheart. They're here to protect the palace and the queen. It takes great strength to stand so still." Noah nodded solemnly, as if this information carried the weight of a profound secret. He tightened his grip on the armrests of his wheelchair, imagining what it might be like to guard something so important. The simple wonder of childhood shone in his gaze. But as the pair basked in the morning serenity, a shadow loomed over them. It wasn't from the towering palace or the massive gate. It was from a man in the unmistakable uniform of a Royal Guardsman. His face was hardened with years of discipline, his broad shoulders filling out his red coat as though he were carved from the stone walls behind him. Yet it wasn't his stature that caught Amara's attention. It was his expression. A sneer crept across his face, laced with disdain. "Move along," the guardsman barked, his voice cold and sharp like a blade cutting through the air. Amara looked up, startled. "Excuse me," she replied, her voice calm but firm. The guardsman took a step forward, his boots striking the pavement with purpose. "You're in the way," he said, his words laden with an unspoken judgment. "This isn't a place for." He let the sentence hang, his gaze flickering to Noah before returning to Amara. Amara's jaw tightened, but she refused to waver. "My son is enjoying the view, just like everyone else here. We're not disturbing anyone." The guard's face darkened, his sneer deepening into something more menacing. "That's not the point. You're blocking the flow. You people always." He caught himself, but the implication lingered like a bitter taste in the air. Noah shrank in his wheelchair, his small hands gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. Amara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and straightened to meet the guard's glare. "My son has as much right to be here as anyone else," she said, her voice steady. The guardsman's lip curled. "Rights?" he scoffed. "You think this is about rights. This is about respecting the sanctity of this place. And you." He jabbed a gloved finger toward the wheelchair. "Are making a spectacle." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people stepped closer, their phones raised, sensing a spectacle of their own. Amara inhaled deeply, her composure unwavering. "We're here to admire the palace, not to cause trouble. If anyone's creating a scene, it's you." The guard's face flushed crimson. His eyes darted to the growing crowd, then back to Amara and Noah. Something in his demeanor shifted, a dangerous mix of embarrassment and anger taking hold. "You think you can talk to me like that?" he hissed, his voice low but venomous. "I'm telling you to leave. Now." Amara's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "We're not leaving. My son deserves to be here, just like everyone else." Noah's wide eyes filled with tears, his small body trembling in the wheelchair. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Let's just go." But Amara wouldn't budge. She knew that retreating now would send a message to her son, that bullies in positions of power could always win, and she couldn't let him believe that. The guardsman, his frustration boiling over, grabbed the handles of Noah's wheelchair. "If you won't move," he growled, "I'll make you." Gasps erupted from the crowd as the guard yanked the wheelchair, jerking Noah forward. The boy cried out, clutching at the armrests as Amara lunged to stop him. "Don't touch him," she shouted, her voice slicing through the commotion. She grabbed the wheelchair's handles, her strength fueled by a mother's fury, but the guard was stronger, his grip unyielding. The scene spiraled into chaos. Bystanders whispered among themselves, their phones capturing every moment. A few shouted in protest, but none stepped forward to intervene. The air buzzed with tension, the kind that demanded action but received only silence. Noah sobbed, his voice small and broken. "Mom, please, I'm scared." Amara clung to the wheelchair, her eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Let him go," she demanded, her voice shaking but resolute. "You're hurting him." The guard paused, his chest heaving. His grip on the wheelchair tightened before he abruptly released it, shoving it toward Amara with a force that made her stumble. "Fine," he spat. "Stay here and embarrass yourself. But don't expect sympathy when people see you for what you really are." He turned sharply, his boots echoing against the pavement as he marched back to his post. The crowd remained silent, their expressions a mix of shock, pity, and quiet judgment. No one moved to help as Amara knelt beside Noah, her hands trembling as she adjusted his seat. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice soothing despite the storm brewing inside her. "You're safe." But as Noah buried his tear-streaked face in his hands, Amara knew this was far from over. The world had seen her son as a nuisance, and her as a troublemaker. And now, the world needed to see the truth. This was only the beginning. Strength in the shadows. Amara stood still as a statue, her hands gripping the handles of Noah's wheelchair. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, but her face remained calm, her eyes fixed on the retreating figure of the Royal Guardsman. Around her, the crowd buzzed like an unsettled hive, their murmurs and camera clicks punctuating the air. Noah sniffled quietly, his small frame trembling in the seat as his mother leaned down to comfort him. "It's okay, my love," she whispered, stroking his cheek. "Mommy's here." "But why, Mom?" Noah's voice cracked. "Why did he do that? I didn't do anything wrong." Amara bit her lip, struggling to hold back her tears. How could she explain hatred to a child who hadn't yet learned to hate? How could she tell him that sometimes the world judged people by the color of their skin or the circumstances of their lives, instead of their hearts? "You did nothing wrong," she said softly. "Remember that, Noah. You didn't do anything wrong." Her words were as much for herself as they were for her son. The crowd began to shift uneasily, and Amara could feel their stares like daggers in her back. Some looked away when she met their gaze, ashamed of their own inaction. Others whispered among themselves, their words indistinct but heavy with judgment. A few, emboldened by the distance between themselves and the guardsmen, muttered words of support that were too soft to matter. "I can't believe he did that," someone said. "Someone should report him," another voice chimed in. But still, no one moved. Amara straightened her back and looked around. The silence of their complicity angered her more than the guardsmen's blatant aggression. These people, who had watched and done nothing, were part of the problem. But she couldn't focus on them now. Her priority was Noah. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "We'll find a quiet place to sit for a moment." Amara pushed the wheelchair through the murmuring crowd, her head held high. The weight of their stares bore down on her, but she refused to let them see her falter. Noah remained quiet, his small hands gripping the armrests as if the ground beneath him might give way. As they reached the edge of the square, a voice called out behind them. "Excuse me, miss." Amara turned, her heart sinking. A young man with a camera slung around his neck approached, his expression a mix of nervousness and determination. He wore a plain shirt and jeans, his sneakers scuffing against the pavement as he jogged toward them. I saw what happened," he stammered, glancing at Noah, and then back at Amara. "That wasn't right." None of it was. Amara's jaw tightened. She'd heard words like these before, hollow sympathies from people who wanted to feel good about themselves without taking real action. "And what are you going to do about it?" she asked, her tone sharp. The man blinked, caught off guard by her bluntness. I want to help. I caught everything on video. I thought maybe. I don't know. I could share it. People need to see this." Amara studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing. There was something genuine in his eyes, a flicker of conviction that she hadn't seen in the others. Still, she was wary. Too many times, people had promised change but delivered nothing. "And what will that accomplish?" she asked. "A video won't erase what just happened. It won't stop people like him from treating others the same way tomorrow." The man hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. But it's a start. People need to see the truth. Maybe it'll make them think twice next time." Amara sighed. She wanted to believe him, but her trust had been eroded by years of experiences like this. Still, she knew the power of exposure. If nothing else, it could spark a conversation, and conversations had the potential to grow into movements. "Do what you think is right," she said finally, turning away, "but don't expect me to thank you for it." The man nodded, his expression solemn. "I won't, but I'll make sure people see what really happened." As Amara pushed Noah's wheelchair toward a shaded bench, she felt a mix of exhaustion and resolve settle over her. She didn't want to relive the morning's events, but she knew she couldn't ignore them either. This wasn't just about her and Noah. It was about the countless others who had faced similar treatment in silence. Once they reached the bench, Amara sat down beside Noah and took his hand. His fingers were cold, trembling slightly as he looked up at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Mom," he said softly, Am I different?" Her heart broke at the question. She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You're unique, Noah," she said firmly. "You're kind, smart, and brave. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like being different is a bad thing. You hear me?" Noah nodded, but his eyes were still clouded with doubt. Amara hugged him tightly, her resolve hardening like steel. She wouldn't let this moment define him. She wouldn't let it define her. As the morning turned to afternoon, Amara began to notice more and more people glancing their way. Some approached with hesitant smiles, offering words of support. Others simply nodded in silent acknowledgement before moving on. And then, just as the weight of the day began to feel unbearable, an older woman with silver hair and a kind smile stopped in front of them. She held out a hand, her voice warm and steady. "My name is Margaret," she said. "I'm a retired solicitor. I saw what happened, and I want to help." Amara looked at the woman, her guarded expression softening slightly. "Help how?" Margaret smiled. "By making sure that man answers for what he did, and by making sure you and your son don't have to face this alone." For the first time that day, Amara felt a glimmer of hope. She glanced at Noah, who looked back at her with cautious optimism, and then turned to Margaret. "All right," she said. "Let's talk." The quiet revolution. The afternoon sun hung high over London, its warm rays illuminating the historic streets. Tourists continued to mill about the square near Buckingham Palace, but the tension that had crackled in the air earlier now lingered like a fading storm. Amara, Noah, and Margaret sat together on a shaded bench, their small cluster creating an island of quiet determination amidst the ebb and flow of the bustling city. Margaret adjusted her glasses, her sharp eyes scanning the square as if taking in every detail. Her silver hair caught the sunlight, but her demeanor was anything but gentle. There was a fire in her gaze, a lawyer's instinct honed by decades of fighting injustices, big and small. She turned to Amara, her voice calm but resolute. "First," Margaret began, "we need to document everything. Every detail, every word, every action. This isn't just a matter of opinion, it's a matter of evidence." Amara nodded, her hands still resting protectively on Noah's small shoulders. "I understand. But will that be enough? People like him, They always seem to get away with it. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. Not if we handle this the right way. The video that young man took could be crucial, but we'll need more. Witness statements, reports to the proper authorities, and public attention. This isn't just about holding him accountable. It's about showing others that behavior like this won't be tolerated. Noah sat quietly, his small hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. He looked up at his mother and Margaret, his young face etched with confusion and unease. "Will the bad man go to jail?" he asked softly. Margaret's expression softened as she crouched down to meet his gaze. "It's not just about punishing him, Noah," she said gently. "It's about making sure he, and everyone else, understands that what he did was wrong, so no one else has to go through what you did today." Noah nodded slowly, but his small brow furrowed in thought. "Will it really change anything?" he asked. Amara's heart ached at the question, but she refused to let her doubt show. "It will, sweetheart," she said firmly. "Even small changes can grow into something bigger. You'll see." Margaret straightened, pulling a small notepad and pen from her handbag. "Let's start with your account, Amara," she said. "Walk me through everything, from the moment you arrived at the palace." As Amara began recounting the events of the day, her voice steady but laced with emotion, a small crowd started to gather nearby. At first, they were simply passers-by, curious about the trio's intense conversation. But as they overheard snippets of Amara's story, some paused to listen, their expressions shifting from casual interest to concern. One man, wearing a faded jacket and carrying a shopping bag, stepped forward hesitantly. "I saw what happened earlier," he said. "That guard, he was out of line." Margaret's sharp eyes fixed on him. "Would you be willing to give a statement?" she asked. The man hesitated, glancing around nervously. "I don't want any trouble," he muttered. Amara's voice broke through the growing tension. "Please," she said softly. "This isn't just for us. It's for everyone who's ever been treated like this." The man looked at her, then at Noah, whose wide eyes shone with a mix of hope and fear. After a moment, he nodded. "All right, I'll help." Margaret smiled approvingly and jotted down his contact information. As she did, another woman stepped forward, holding her phone. "I got part of it on video," she said, "if it helps." "It absolutely helps," Margaret said, her voice firm. "Thank you." One by one, others began to step forward, some with videos, others with their own accounts of what they'd witnessed. The small crowd grew, their collected voices weaving a tapestry of solidarity. For the first time that day, Amara felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Community. People who had been silent earlier were now speaking up, their initial fear replaced by a shared sense of injustice. But not everyone in the crowd was supportive. A man in a tailored suit, his arms crossed over his chest, scoffed loudly. "You're all blowing this out of proportion," he said. "It was just an overreaction." The guard was doing his job. Amara turned to face him, her expression calm, but her voice cutting. Was it his job to humiliate a child? To push a wheelchair aside like it was trash? If that's what you think, then maybe you're part of the problem. The man opened his mouth to retort but closed it again, his face reddening as murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Margaret stepped forward, her voice commanding attention. "This isn't about one incident," she said, addressing the group. "This is about the kind of society we want to live in, one where everyone is treated with dignity, regardless of their circumstances." The crowd murmured in agreement, and even those who had been hesitant began to nod. The atmosphere shifted again, the weight of collective understanding settling over the square. Just then, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. A police car pulled up to the edge of the square, and two officers stepped out, their expressions neutral but curious as they took in the scene. The crowd parted slightly, creating a pathway for them to approach. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, addressed the group. "What's going on here?" Margaret stepped forward, her posture confident. "We're here to report an incident of harassment and assault by a Royal Guardsman," she said, her voice steady. "Several witnesses can corroborate the story, and there's video evidence." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the organized response. He glanced at Amara and Noah, his gaze softening as he took in the boy's tear-streaked face. "We'll take statements from everyone involved," he said, pulling out a notebook. "But let's keep this calm and orderly." As the crowd began to give their accounts, Amara knelt beside Noah, who was watching the officers intently. "Are they going to help us, Mom?" he asked quietly. Amara smiled, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "I think they might," she said. "And if they don't, we'll keep fighting until someone does." Noah nodded, his small shoulders straightening slightly. For the first time that day, he didn't feel entirely powerless. His mother's strength, Margaret's determination, and the support of strangers had created a spark of hope within him. As the police began their work, Margaret leaned down to Amara. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly. "There will be pushback. People will try to dismiss this or bury it. But if we keep pushing, we can make a difference." Amara nodded, her resolve firm. "For Noah," she said simply, "and for everyone else." The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the square. But within those shadows, a quiet revolution was beginning, a movement born of pain, anger, and an unyielding belief in the power of justice. Amara held Noah's hand tightly, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and determination. They weren't alone anymore, and together they would ensure that their voices, small as they might seem, would echo far and wide. The weight of truth. The next day dawned with a kind of quiet that seemed to hum with anticipation. The events in front of Buckingham Palace were already gaining traction online. By morning, the video footage of the guardsman's actions, captured from multiple angles, had gone viral. Social media was ablaze with outrage, sparking debates across platforms and communities. Some condemned the guardsman's behavior outright, calling it a disgrace to the uniform, while others attempted to downplay the incident or shift the blame to Amara and Noah. Amara sat at the kitchen table in their small but cozy apartment, her phone vibrating with a constant stream of notifications. News outlets had picked up the story, requesting interviews and statements. Her email inbox was filled with messages, some supportive, others venomous. The duality of public reaction was overwhelming. Noah sat nearby, absently coloring in a book, his usual enthusiasm dimmed by the weight of the previous day's experience. Amara watched him quietly, her heart aching for her son. She wished she could shield him from the world's ugliness, but she also knew this moment was bigger than either of them. A knock at the door broke the silence. Amara stood and opened it to find Margaret standing there, clutching a folder and wearing the determined expression Amara was beginning to recognize as her default. "Good morning," Margaret said briskly, stepping inside. "I've been working since sunrise. We have a lot to discuss." Amara raised an eyebrow, motioning for Margaret to sit. "You don't waste time, do you?" Margaret chuckled. "Time is a luxury we can't afford when the world is watching. I've contacted a few organizations that deal with discrimination and human rights. They're interested in supporting your case, but they need you to officially agree." Amara sat down, rubbing her temples. "I'm not sure what kind of case this even is. A man humiliated my son. He pushed his wheelchair. He said horrible things. But what does that mean legally?" Margaret opened the folder and spread out several documents. "It means a lot," she said. "The guardsman's actions were not only morally reprehensible, but also likely violated laws against harassment and discrimination. We can pursue this as both a civil and public case, but you need to be prepared for the scrutiny." Amara looked at Noah, who was still coloring, his small hands clutching the crayons tightly. She turned back to Margaret. "I want to do what's right," she said softly. "But I don't want Noah to suffer more because of this." Margaret's expression softened. "Noah's already shown remarkable strength, Amara. And so have you. The best way to protect him, and others like him, is to hold people accountable. This case isn't just about yesterday. It's about sending a message. Amara nodded slowly. She knew Margaret was right, but the enormity of what lay ahead was daunting. "What's the next step?" she asked. Margaret handed her a pen. "Sign these agreements to let the organizations represent you. After that, we prepare to file an official complaint with the Royal Guard's oversight body. The media attention is already working in your favor, but it's also a double-edged sword. Be ready for backlash." Amara signed the documents with a steady hand, her resolve strengthening with each stroke of the pen. "I've dealt with backlash before," she said quietly. "I'll deal with it again." That afternoon, the story escalated further. Major news networks ran segments about the incident, showing clips of the viral video and interviewing witnesses who had been at the palace. Public opinion began to swell, with hashtags trending globally. People of all backgrounds shared their own stories of facing discrimination, creating a wave of solidarity that Amara hadn't expected. Still, there were detractors. Social media comment sections became battlegrounds, with some accusing Amara of exaggerating the incident for attention. Others defended the guardsman, claiming he had been provoked or was simply enforcing rules. One particularly vile comment caught Amara's eye as she scrolled through her phone. Maybe if she hadn't brought a wheelchair to a place like that, none of this would have happened. "Stop playing the victim." Her chest tightened, anger bubbling beneath the surface. She put the phone down and stepped away, needing to breathe. The negativity threatened to consume her, but she reminded herself why she was doing this. For Noah, for other children, and for anyone who had been made to feel small. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Amara received a call from an unexpected source. The commanding officer of the Royal Guard wanted to meet with her. Margaret, who was sitting across from her at the table, immediately advised caution. "They might be trying to control the narrative," Margaret warned. "Be careful what you say." Amara nodded, but her curiosity was piqued. "I want to hear what they have to say," she said. "If nothing else, it will show Noah that standing up for yourself matters." The meeting was scheduled for the next morning at a government office near the palace. Amara and Margaret arrived together, their steps purposeful as they entered the imposing building. They were led to a modest conference room where two men in formal military attire waited. One was an older man with a stern expression, and the other was younger, his face unreadable. "Ms. Johnson," the older man said, rising to shake her hand. "I'm Colonel Harris. This is Captain Whittaker. Thank you for coming." Amara took a seat, her expression calm but guarded. "I hope this isn't just a formality," she said, "because what happened yesterday was anything but." Colonel Harris cleared his throat. "Let me start by saying the Royal Guard takes these matters very seriously. The behavior of one of our own, as captured in the video, was unacceptable and does not reflect the values we uphold." Amara raised an eyebrow. "If you take it so seriously, why did it take a viral video for you to address it?" The colonel flinched slightly but maintained his composure. "You're right, and I won't make excuses. That's why we've suspended the guardsmen involved pending an internal investigation. But we also wanted to meet with you personally to apologize and to discuss how we can address this matter publicly." Margaret leaned forward, her lawyerly instincts kicking in. "Addressing it publicly is a start, but it's not enough. What measures will you put in place to ensure this doesn't happen again? What training will your guards undergo to prevent discriminatory behavior?" Captain Whittaker, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "We're already reviewing our training protocols, and we plan to implement mandatory sessions on bias and cultural sensitivity. We also want to work with organizations like the ones representing you to better understand where we failed." Amara listened carefully, her skepticism lingering. "This is a good start," she said finally. "But words without action mean nothing. I'll be watching closely to see if you follow through." The colonel nodded. "Fair enough. And again, we're deeply sorry for what you and your son experienced. We hope to regain your trust." Amara stood, her posture radiating quiet strength. "Trust is earned," she said. "And right now, you have a long way to go." As she and Margaret left the building, the cold January air hit their faces. Amara glanced at Margaret, who gave her a small, approving nod. "That was impressive," Margaret said. "You didn't let them off easy." Amara exhaled, her breath visible in the crisp air. "I couldn't. Not after what Noah went through. Not after everything." Margaret smiled. "And that's exactly why you're going to make a difference." Amara didn't respond, but as they walked back to the car, a faint smile tugged at her lips. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt like they might actually win. A battle beyond the palace. The world moved quickly. In the days following Amara's meeting with the Royal Guard leadership, her story continued to spread. What had started as a single viral video became a rallying cry for change, sparking debates about systemic discrimination, power dynamics, and the courage it took to stand up to injustice. Television segments dissected the incident, newspapers ran op-eds, and social media burned with commentary. Voices from all walks of life weighed in, from celebrities tweeting their support to everyday people, sharing their own stories of resilience. Amara and Noah had become unwilling symbols of a movement larger than themselves. Amara sat in their living room, the weight of the past week pressing heavily on her shoulders. Noah sat next to her on the couch, clutching his favorite stuffed bear, a brown teddy with one ear slightly frayed. He had been quieter than usual, his usual curiosity replaced by a solemnity that didn't belong on an 8-year-old's face. "Mom." Noah's small voice broke the silence. "Yes, sweetheart," Amara replied, her hand gently brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "Why do people hate us?" The question, so direct and innocent, hit her like a punch to the chest. She paused, searching for the right words. "Not everyone hates us," she said finally. "But some people are scared of what they don't understand. And sometimes, when people are scared, they act in ways that hurt others. But why are they scared of us?" Noah pressed, his big eyes searching hers for answers. Amara swallowed hard. "Because we're different," she admitted, "and because they don't know how special that makes us." Noah nodded slowly, but she could tell he wasn't satisfied. The pain of watching her son grapple with something so heavy at such a young age filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. She vowed silently to keep fighting, not just for him, but for every child who had been made to feel small. The next morning, Amara found herself standing on the steps of a local community center, preparing to address a room full of reporters, activists, and supporters. Margaret stood beside her, a reassuring presence, while Noah sat in his wheelchair at her side, his eyes wide with a mix of nervousness and pride. The media had been relentless in their pursuit of Amara, but she had chosen this moment to speak, not in front of the grand gates of Buckingham Palace, but here, in the heart of the community that had rallied around her. The room buzzed with anticipation as Amara stepped up to the podium. Cameras clicked, flashes lit up the room, and the murmurs of the crowd fell silent. She gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles white, and took a deep breath. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor of nerves beneath it. "My name is Amara Johnson, and I am here today not just as a mother, but as a voice for those who cannot always speak for themselves." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. What happened to my son Noah and me last week was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deeper problem, one that so many people face every day, but are too often forced to endure in silence. The crowd murmured in agreement, their expressions a mix of sympathy and determination. "My son," Amara continued, her voice growing stronger, "is an innocent child. He did nothing to deserve the treatment he received that day. And yet, he was made to feel like he didn't belong, like he was less than. That is unacceptable." She glanced down at Noah, who was watching her with wide, admiring eyes. The sight gave her strength. "But this isn't just about my family," she said, turning back to the crowd. It's about every person who has ever been told they don't belong, every child who has ever been made to feel small, every voice that has been silenced by those who abuse their power. Amara leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying a quiet intensity. We cannot change the past, but we can shape the future, and I refuse to let fear or hatred dictate what that future looks like for my son, or for anyone else. Applause erupted from the crowd, the sound filling the room and spilling out into the street. Amara stepped back, her chest heaving with emotion, as Margaret took the podium to outline the next steps of their legal and advocacy campaign. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The guardsman involved in the incident was formally dismissed from his post after an investigation confirmed his misconduct. The Royal Guard issued a public apology, pledging to overhaul their training programs and implement new protocols to prevent future incidents. But for Amara, this was only the beginning. With Margaret's guidance, she began working with advocacy groups, attending meetings and speaking at events to raise awareness about discrimination and the importance of standing up to injustice. Her once quiet life was now filled with interviews, conferences, and community organizing. Noah, too, began to find his voice. At one event, he surprised everyone by asking to speak. Amara watched with tears in her eyes as her son, her brave and resilient boy, told the crowd about what had happened to him and how it had made him feel. "But my mom told me something," Noah said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "She said being different doesn't make you bad. It makes you special." And I think she's right. The crowd erupted into applause, and Amara hugged Noah tightly as he returned to her side. In that moment, she knew the fight was worth it. As the months passed, the impact of their story continued to ripple outward. New policies were introduced not only within the Royal Guard, but across other institutions as well. Public conversations about discrimination grew louder, and more people came forward to share their experiences. Amara and Noah's lives were forever changed, but they found a new normal, one defined not by what had been taken from them, but by what they had built together. Their fight had become a beacon of hope for others, a reminder that even in the face of cruelty, courage, and love could prevail. And in the quiet moments, when it was just the two of them at home, Amara would look at Noah and see not the boy who had been hurt, but the boy who had inspired a movement. And she knew, with unshakable certainty, that they had made a difference, a legacy forged in resilience. Months turned into a year, and the world continued to evolve in the wake of Amara and Noah's story. What had begun as a moment of humiliation on the streets of London had grown into a transformative movement. But for Amara, the most significant change wasn't the policies or public outcry. It was the way her son had come to see himself. Noah was no longer the quiet, unsure boy who had clung to his mother's hand in fear. He had grown into a child filled with confidence and determination, fueled by the knowledge that his voice mattered. On a chilly January morning, 1 year to the day since the incident at Buckingham Palace, Amara found herself once again in the heart of London. This time, she and Noah stood before a large crowd gathered in a park near the palace. It was the launch of a new initiative, a program aimed at promoting inclusivity and accessibility across public spaces, inspired in part by Noah's experience. The crowd buzzed with anticipation as Amara took the stage, her heart pounding. Noah sat in his wheelchair beside her, holding a small microphone in his lap. He had insisted on speaking today, and she couldn't have been prouder. "Thank you all for being here," Amara began, her voice steady but warm. "1 year ago, my son and I came to this city to admire its beauty and history. Instead, we were met with hatred and humiliation. But what was meant to tear us down became the foundation for something far greater." She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. "Today, we stand here not as victims, but as advocates. We stand here to ensure that no child, no family, ever has to endure what we did. This initiative is not just about accessibility. It's about equality, respect, and dignity for all." Amara turned to Noah, who was gripping his microphone tightly, his small fingers trembling with excitement. "And now," she said, smiling down at him, "I'd like to hand the microphone to the bravest person I know, my son Noah." The crowd erupted into applause as Noah rolled forward. He glanced at his mother, who gave him an encouraging nod, and then turned to face the sea of faces before him. "Hi," he began, his voice a little shaky but filled with determination. "My name is Noah Johnson. A year ago, I was really scared. I thought the world was a bad place because of what happened to me and my mom. But then I saw how many people cared, how many people stood up for us." He paused, glancing down at the microphone before looking back up, his small face alight with a mix of vulnerability and courage. "My mom always tells me that being different is what makes us special. And now I believe her. I believe that everyone deserves to feel special, no matter who they are or where they're from." The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. Even the cold wind seemed to pause as Noah's voice rang out. "So this program we're starting isn't just for people like me who need wheelchairs," he continued. "It's for everyone who's ever felt like they don't belong. Because everyone does belong. And I'm going to keep fighting to make sure they know it." The applause was deafening. Amara wiped away a tear as Noah grinned, his face glowing with pride. She reached down to squeeze his shoulder, and he looked up at her with the same wide-eyed admiration he always had. After the event, reporters swarmed around them, asking questions about the initiative and their plans for the future. Amara answered patiently, but her focus remained on Noah, who handled the attention with a poise that amazed her. In the weeks that followed, the initiative gained momentum, drawing support from government officials, businesses, and community leaders. Amara and Noah became regular faces at events and meetings, their story a rallying point for change. The program not only improved accessibility, but also fostered conversations about the systemic biases that had long gone unaddressed. But even as their public lives grew busier, Amara made sure to carve out quiet moments for just her and Noah. They would spend evenings reading together, playing board games, or simply talking about their day. It was in these moments that Amara felt most connected to her son, who had become her greatest teacher in resilience and hope. One afternoon, as they walked through a park near their apartment, Noah stopped suddenly. He looked up at his mother with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," he said, "do you think that Guard ever thinks about what he did?" Amara crouched down so they were eye level. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I hope he does, and I hope he's learned from it." Noah nodded, his small brow furrowing in thought. "I think he might, because we didn't let him win." Amara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "That's right, sweetheart, we didn't let him win." As they continued walking, Noah glanced up at the sky, his face serene. "I think people can change, Mom. Even him. They just need someone to show them how." Amara looked at her son, marveling at the wisdom in his words. "You're right," she said softly, "and you're helping show them." Years later, the story of Amara and Noah's fight for justice would be taught in classrooms and remembered as a turning point in the struggle for equality and inclusion. The initiative they had launched grew into a nationwide movement, transforming public spaces and reshaping the way society treated its most vulnerable members. But for Amara, the true legacy of their journey wasn't in the policies or programs. It was in the young man her son had become. A boy who had faced hatred and responded with compassion. A boy who had inspired a nation to believe in the power of love over fear. And as she watched Noah one day, now a teenager, speaking confidently at a global summit on equality, Amara knew that their story wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever fought to be seen, to be heard, and to belong. And it was a story that would never be forgotten. The legacy of courage. As Noah's teenage years unfolded, his life became a whirlwind of purpose. The once shy boy who clung to his mother for strength had grown into a young man who radiated resilience and compassion. His name was now synonymous with advocacy, and his voice carried weight far beyond the small London flat he and Amara called home. It was a crisp spring day when Noah found himself back in front of Buckingham Palace, this time not as a victim of injustice, but as an honored guest. The Royal Guard had invited him and Amara to a special ceremony recognizing their efforts to bring about meaningful change within the institution. Noah's initiative had sparked reforms in training, recruitment, and public interaction, and the guardsman who had mistreated him was no longer in service. The square was filled with people, supporters, journalists, and onlookers. A podium stood at the center, adorned with the insignia of the Royal Guard. Noah, now 16, sat confidently in his wheelchair beside his mother, who watched him with pride shining in her eyes. Colonel Harris, the same man who had met with Amara a year prior, stepped up to the microphone. His demeanor was formal but sincere, his voice carrying across the square. Today, we honor not just a young man, but a movement born out of courage, determination, and the belief that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, deserves respect and dignity. Noah Johnson, your story has not only changed this institution, but has inspired countless others to reflect on their own actions and beliefs. The crowd erupted into applause as Noah rolled forward to the podium. He adjusted the microphone and glanced at his mother, who gave him a reassuring nod. Then, with the poise of someone twice his age, he began to speak. "Thank you," Noah said, his voice clear and steady. "It's strange being here again, in the place where everything started. But today feels different. Today, I'm not here because of what happened to me. I'm here because of what we've built together." He paused, scanning the crowd. A lot of people ask me why I kept fighting. Why my mom and I didn't just walk away. The answer is simple, because walking away wouldn't have changed anything. Standing up did. The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. We didn't fight because we were angry, though we had every right to be. We fought because we believe in something bigger than anger. We believe in fairness, in kindness, in a world where people don't have to prove their worth just to exist. Noah's voice grew stronger, his conviction shining through. I've learned something important in the past few years. Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens because people come together. It happens because someone says, "This isn't right," and others decide to stand with them. He smiled, glancing back at Amara. And it happens because of moms like mine, who teach their kids to keep their heads high and their hearts open, no matter what. The crowd applauded loudly, some wiping away tears as Noah continued. This moment isn't the end of the journey. It's just the beginning. There's still so much work to do, but I know we can do it, together. Noah's final words were met with a standing ovation. Amara clapped proudly, her heart swelling as she watched her son, no longer the fragile boy who once asked why people hated him, but a beacon of hope for others. As the ceremony concluded, Noah and Amara were approached by people from all walks of life. Some wanted to thank them. Others wanted to share their own stories of struggle and perseverance. The atmosphere was one of unity and healing, a far cry from the hostility they had faced on that fateful day years ago. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Amara and Noah sat together on a bench overlooking the Thames. The city lights shimmered on the water, and the sounds of London life hummed in the background. "You did it, Noah," Amara said softly, her hand resting on his. "You've changed the world." Noah shook his head, smiling. "We did it, Mom. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Amara squeezed his hand, her eyes misting. "You've always had it in you, Noah. I just helped you see it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their journey settling into a shared sense of peace. Noah turned to his mother, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think people will remember," he asked, "what we fought for?" Amara smiled, her gaze fixed on the glowing city skyline. "I think they will," she said, "because stories like ours aren't just remembered. They're carried forward. They become part of the way people see the world, part of the way they choose to act. Noah nodded, his heart full. Then I'm glad we fought. So am I, Amara said, her voice steady and filled with pride. As the evening grew darker, they sat together, mother and son, their bond stronger than ever. The world around them continued to buzz and bustle, but for that moment, they were at peace. Two souls who had faced the storm and emerged stronger, ready to leave a legacy of hope, resilience, and change. And in that quiet moment, they knew their story had only just begun.